A calm morning, a fuel pump clicks, a truck driver fills up, a mother starts the school run, a cargo ship clears a harbor, and somewhere thousands of miles away, a strip of water so narrow you could almost miss it on a map decides the price of all of it. Because the biggest shock in energy is not happening at the gas station. It's happening at a choke point. And if the Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut down, then this is not just another Middle East headline. This is the moment the modern world discovers how fragile it really is. Because most people think fuel prices rise slowly, predictably. A few cents here, a few cents there, but that is not how this works. When Hormuz breaks, prices do not climb like an elevator. They explode like a trap door opening beneath the global economy. And here's the twist. This crisis is not really about oil. It is about dependency. It is about a world that built its entire rhythm, shipping, food, flights, plastics, fertilizer, commuting, heating, industry, on the assumption that one narrow passage would always stay open. That assumption is gone. And that means the question is no longer, will fuel get more expensive? The real question is, how expensive can civilization afford to let it get before everything else starts breaking too? Because this isn't what it looks like. This is not a regional shipping problem. It is a global price machine. And once that machine jams, everyone pays immediately, violently, relentlessly. Before the latest shock, around 20 million barrels of oil move through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. At about 1/5 of global petroleum liquids consumption and more than a quarter of global seaborne oil trade. In the current disruption, the International Energy Agency says flows through the strait collapsed from roughly 20 million barrels per day to just over 2 million in March. That is not a dent. That is an amputation. Source. And here is the number that should make your stomach drop. The U.S. Energy Information Administration says Brent crude averaged $103 a barrel in March, could peak around $115 in the second quarter, and U.S. retail gasoline could approach $4.30 a gallon in April, while diesel rises above $5.80. Now, that isn't a forecast that assumes the conflict does not drag on for months and that flows gradually resume. In other words, that is the optimistic version. Source. But even that doesn't tell the full story, because fuel is never just fuel. When energy spikes, transport spikes. When transport spikes, food spikes. When food spikes, politics spikes. When politics spikes, everything becomes unstable. That is why Hormuz matters to people who have never heard of Hormuz. You can live in Berlin, Lagos, Mumbai, Seoul, Sao Paulo, or Los Angeles. You can drive an SUV or never own a car. You can heat your home with gas, cook with electricity, or ride a train to work. It does not matter. You still live inside an energy system whose heartbeat passes through narrow routes. And the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most dangerous of them all. To understand how expensive fuel can get now, we need to understand something deeper. How did the world get trapped like this? How did a modern economy with satellites, AI, electric cars, strategic reserves, and trillion-dollar governments end up so exposed to one waterway between Iran and Oman? And the answer begins decades ago, before the latest missiles, before the latest tanker alerts, before the latest risk premium hit your screen. It begins with oil becoming more than a commodity. It became power. It became leverage. It became the bloodstream of the 20th century. And once that happened, geography became destiny. The Persian Gulf sat on a staggering concentration of energy wealth. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, Iran, Bahrain. Massive reserves, massive exports, massive dependence on getting that product to the rest of the world. And the easiest, cheapest, fastest route out ran through Hormuz. A source at first, this looked like a miracle of logistics. Ships got bigger, trade got smoother, industrial growth accelerated, cities expanded, suburbs multiplied, jet travel normalized, containers conquered global commerce. The machine worked because energy stayed flowing, always flowing. And because it kept flowing, the world made a catastrophic psychological mistake. It started to believe the flow was natural, automatic, permanent, but it never was. It was political, it was military, it was fragile, and every few years, reality returned like a knife. In the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, the Persian Gulf became a battlefield in what came to be known as the Tanker War. Oil tankers and merchant ships were attacked. Mines appeared in shipping lanes, insurance surged, navies got pulled in. The United States launched Operation Earnest Will to escort reflagged Kuwaiti tankers, the largest naval convoy operation since World War II. Even then, a single mine strike on the tanker Bridgeton humiliated the illusion of control. The escorts ended up following behind a damaged tanker because they were not ready for the mine threat in front of them. Source, think about what that means. The world's energy system did not survive because it was safe. It survived because risk was temporarily managed. That is very different. Safe means secure. Managed means one mistake away from disaster. And that is where everything changes, because the system people imagine and the system that actually exists are not the same thing. People imagine a giant global oil web, infinite routes, infinite suppliers, infinite flexibility. In reality, it is a chokepoint system, a handful of routes, a handful of exporters, a handful of spare capacities, a handful of governments, a handful of military calculations. Remove one of those pillars and prices do not respond gently. They panic. That panic is not irrational. It is mathematics. If around 20 million barrels a day normally move through Hormuz and only a fraction can be rerouted, then the market is not pricing a rumor. It is pricing physical absence. At estimates about 2.6 million barrels per day of spare Saudi and UAE pipeline capacity could be available to bypass the strait in a disruption. The IEA says, even in crisis conditions, bypass options are limited, and only Saudi Arabia and the UAE have operational crude pipelines with roughly 3.5 to 5.5 million barrels per day of available capacity. That still leaves a terrifying gap. Source. And that gap is where fuel prices are born, not at the pump, not at the refinery, not at the gas station sign, at the gap. At the moment, traders, shippers, refiners, governments, and insurers all realize the same thing at the same time. There is not enough easy replacement. So now let's answer the question everybody actually cares about. How expensive will fuel get now? The honest answer is brutal. And it depends on three clocks: the military clock, the shipping clock, and the psychology clock. The military clock asks one thing: how long does the disruption last? Days, weeks, months. The shipping clock asks, can cargoes move even at extreme cost, or are they physically blocked, delayed, rerouted, or stranded? And the psychology clock asks the most dangerous question of all: what do markets believe is coming next? Because oil does not wait for shortages to arrive. Oil prices move when traders think shortages are becoming likely. That is why people sometimes feel cheated. No refinery near them was bombed. No local pipeline was attacked. No gas station on their street ran dry. And yet prices jump. Why? Because the global benchmark has already moved. Because tankers already cost more to insure. Because refiners already have to bid harder for supply. Because every layer of the chain is already preparing for pain. And because once fear enters commodity markets, price becomes a weapon of anticipation. This is where the first major problem begins. Problem number one: the price of fuel is driven by the barrel you fear losing, not just the barrel you already lost. That sounds abstract. It isn't. Imagine a supermarket where 1/3 of the trucks might not arrive next week. What happens today? Stores order early, wholesalers hoard, buyers overpay, customers panic buy. Shortage psychology starts before empty shelves. Oil works the same way, just bigger, faster, and with more zeros. Current forecast already projects gasoline averaging above $3.70 a gallon this year in the United States, under a relatively contained scenario with monthly levels near $4.30 and diesel above $5.80. And remember, the U.S. is less directly dependent on Persian Gulf imports than many countries. In 2024, only about 0.5 million barrels per day of U.S. crude and condensate imports came through Hormuz. About 7% of U.S. crude imports and roughly 2% of U.S. petroleum liquids consumption. Source. That means if America feels pain, Asia feels something far worse, because 84% of crude and condensate and 83% of LNG moving through Hormuz in 2024 went to Asian markets. China, India, Japan, and South Korea were among the top destinations for oil through the strait. On the gas side, 83% of LNG transiting Hormuz also went to Asia, with China, India, and South Korea among the top buyers. Source. So when people ask, will fuel get expensive, they are still thinking too small. The real answer is fuel gets expensive first, where dependence is highest. Then the pain spreads through trade, manufacturing, freight, and competition for replacement supply until everyone is dragged into the same storm. That is why even countries that buy little directly from the Gulf still pay more, because they compete for barrels that used to go somewhere else. Because rerouted cargoes distort the entire map. Because once Asia bids harder for replacement crude and LNG, Europe and other regions must react. And now it gets worse. Because crude oil is only half the story. Problem threat number 2, Hormuz is also a gas bomb. In 2024, about 20% of global LNG trade moved through the Strait of Hormuz, primarily from Qatar. Qatar alone sent about 9.3 billion cubic feet per day of LNG through the strait, while the UAE added another 0.7. The IEA says more than 110 billion cubic meters of LNG passed through Hormuz in 2025, and 93% of Qatar's LNG exports and 96% of the UAE's transited the strait. Source. Why does that matter for fuel? Because when gas markets tighten, power markets tighten. When power markets tighten, industry pays more. When industry pays more, fertilizer, chemicals, metals, and manufacturing all become more expensive. When those costs rise, inflation gets another wave of energy-driven poison. And the IEA says the disruption through Hormuz has reduced LNG supplies from Qatar and the UAE by more than 300 million cubic meters per day since the start of the war, which translates into over 2 billion cubic meters of gas supply lost every week. Asian gas prices have surged to pull in alternative cargoes. Source. This is what makes Hormuz so dangerous. It hits the visible fuel price you notice on the roadside, and the invisible fuel price embedded in almost everything else: electricity, food, shipping, airlines, fertilizer, packaging, construction, industrial heat. This is not one crisis. It is a stack of crises, and stacked crises don't add up. They multiply. But here's where it gets even more dangerous. Problem number 3, the market does not need a total closure to behave like one is coming. That is one of the least understood truths in energy, and you do not need every tanker stopped. You just need enough uncertainty to break normal behavior. If captains hesitate, if charterers delay, if insurers reprice, if naval escorts are stretched, if ports face backlog, if exporters cannot predict loading windows, then partial disruption starts acting a lot like full disruption. The IEA says oil and natural gas prices have risen sharply since the war began. Oil posted its largest ever monthly gain in March, with Brent futures surging more than 60%. Diesel and jet fuel benchmarks in Asia